just going to give him a short intro, and then I know Mark's got a lot of things he wants to communicate to us, and we will open it up for questions in a little bit. Actually, what I'd like to say about that is if you do have a question, you can put it in the chat box. We've got everybody muted, but then we'll unmute you and you can ask your question in a little bit. We've got Angelina helping to host. So it's my pleasure to introduce you. Good morning. It's my pleasure to introduce to you all Mark Murphy. For those of you who don't know who Mark is, he's the CEO of Northeast Private Client Group, and has been a partner with Fortune for nearly 20 years, and he's been my personal friend for 20 years, so it's great to have him on. He is an author of 2 books that are must-reads for all of our Fortune coaches and clients. One is The Win-Win Outcome, and the other one is Extraordinary Wealth. So if you haven't got your hands on those, please do. They focus on true financial wealth is developed by a high level of emotional fitness, which is one of the things that Mark has been teaching for years, and we couldn't need that more now than ever. So it's my pleasure to welcome Mark Murphy. Take it away.
I was going to say, Kim, I have a 3rd book coming out. It's either this year, it's going to be either on the mind of the entrepreneur, or by a show of your response, it's either going to be 30 days to slimmer thighs. It's allowed me to wear a thong on the either going to be one of those
All
two.
Right.
But I think to me, for me is, my favorite time of the year always is March Madness. I'm a big college basketball fan, and I think we're all experiencing March Madness, but it's not the way I think we all expected. And I just want to start my comments by saying to people, I am actually bored and I'm tired of talking about the coronavirus. I'm not going to talk much about that at all. It almost seems to me like if everyone is old enough to remember when Jerry Lewis used to do his telethon on Labor Day weekend, and they'd have a tote board up. I just can't watch cable news anymore, where they have the death toll and the virus toll up all day, every day. People are going to go on suicide watch watching that. I just can't watch that news anymore, and it's just not helpful. It's not productive, and quite frankly, I'm bored discussing it, with one exception. Spent some time yesterday trying to get the state police in New Jersey and the federal government's N95 masks, and trying to help some of our manufacturing clients convert to medically necessary supplies and protective gear. And I think, and help our neighbors and help our friends, and to be a better citizen in both my community, in our community, and in our world. Well, then I'm happy to talk about Corona all day. Other than that, I have no use, and I'm just bored of the topic altogether. But I also start, and I was thinking, what does everybody on this call have in common? Virtually everybody on this call have in common, to me, is that at one point, all of you decided to be entrepreneurs. All of you decided to rely on yourself for your income, for your futures, for your fortunes, for everything that you're there. That's why we're on this call. That's why we have a community. That's why we're a same community. And the thing to me that I started to think about is history is a great teacher. I was trying to think about some of the people who signed up for this webinar. And I can tell you that as I looked at the people on this webinar, there are people on this webinar who started their businesses with absolutely zero patience. They had no patience whatsoever. They started with $600,000 or $700,000 of student debt. They started with practice loans of $1 million or $2 million or more. They had businesses where insurance companies like Delta Dental started reducing their reimbursements. Corporate dentistry came in place. I could go on and on in your corporate life of the challenges that we've faced. And then personally, I know people on this phone, including myself, who have had people that have had deaths in their family. They've had divorces. They've been sued. They've had unkind family and personal interruptions and other things that are far more challenging than what we're going through right now. And I think the message to me is that we'll all get through this. But I think the way we're going to get through this is to learn from the experiences that we had when times were tough. Times were tough either personally for us, or times were tough in our business. And to take that knowledge and that information and have us survive. Because ultimately what's going to happen here, there is a little bit of Darwinism that's going to go during this time. There is a little bit of evolution that's going to go on. And I think the strong practices like the people on this call, if we play our cards right, will not only emerge in whole, they will emerge in much better shape than they are. And I think the very weak players that are in our space and other spaces will maybe not survive or come back in a much worse position. And I do not wish, and I've said this to many of you on the phone over the last 2 weeks, I do not wish anybody to have any economic disruption. I do not wish anybody to be sick. I do not wish anyone to die, for sure. but I do think that that great fortunes in this country and in this world are made during times like this, not in the boom times, but in times like this. And I just want to focus my comments today on three topics, and they all start with I. So the three I's. Well, I want to start with, inspiration, in that we on this phone are here to create our own futures. The second would be intentionality, in that we are going to use deliberate planning to reach our destinies with deliberate, thoughtful, thought out well moves. And then the third, I think, is innovation, because I think the world is changing, and it's going to change not only how we operate, but a little bit how we think. And as I said, I think the people on this phone will soar, once we come out of this, if we do some of the things that we've all been talking about over the last couple of weeks. One of the things that you guys have heard me talk an awful lot about was, in real estate, they say, what's the three most important things with real estate? And it's location, location, location. And you've heard me say, if you've heard me speak at all, you've heard me say that the most important thing is liquidity, liquidity, liquidity. And so I don't know how much, and by the way, the information that I'm going to give you now is the most up-to-date information that I have. There's still some details to be worked out between the House and the Senate and how the government actually implements these plans. But just to kind of give you an overview, I'm actually cautiously optimistic that not only all of your teams are going to be taken care of, because I know an awful lot of you who employ people are very proud of the employees that we have, the amount of people that we help them pay their rent, pay their mortgages, send their kids to college, do all the things that all of our employees have done. And I think one of the things this bill is going to do is to make sure that our employees are okay. But then when I try to talk about you as the business owner or the employer, here's what I'm seeing, some things coming out that I think is important. One is that the IRS has something that's called paycheck protection. And basically what the IRS is going to do is they're going to give us, or the government's going to give us, 2.5 times our payroll as of February 15th. And as long as we use that for payroll, we use it for mortgages or rent, or we use it for some certain utility expenses, the government's going to forgive that loan. So if you have $100,000 a month of payroll, you can expect to get about $250,000. And as long as you use it for those expenses, because I think the government is intent on keeping people not on unemployment, but it's intent on keeping teams and offices and companies together so that we come back, when we come back out of this, our companies are ready to get right back to work. And that would be the protection plan. If you use it and go buy a sports car for yourself, or you use it for something else, to pay off some other debt or something, it's likely that the government's going to come after you and you're going to have to pay that money back. The second part of the plan is the disaster relief loan, which I've talked to several or many of you about. And that will be the ability, I think, likely through the SBA, to be able to give us loans of up to $2 million at no more than 4% interest rates. It's still unclear whether any of that will be forgiven or whether it will be on a low-cost loan for as much as 30 years, maybe as little as 10 years. And they're still working out the details on that. And then I think there's little other things in the plan, like the ability, if you're under 59 and a half years old and you would be subject to a 10% excise tax penalty to pull money out of your IRAs or your 401ks, they're talking about being able to pull out $100,000 penalty-free, not tax-free, but penalty-free. And so there's a lot of other little goodies like that that are in part of the plan. I think there's it's a 1,400-page plan, and I think I was just trying to give you the highlights. But I think for most of the people on this call, what you've got is you've got your own backstop, the fact that you've got lines of credit yourself, you've got liquidity. I don't think cash or municipal bonds or cash value life insurance ever looked so good as it did today. It looks, those life insurance policies you have, that cash you have, those municipal bonds is king. It's the greatest assets that you can own right now. And then on top of that, I think what the government is really trying to do is to make sure, A, our employees are fine, but B, with these programs, will allow us to at least get through the next 2.5 to 3 months intact and be in at least as good a position as we are for most people. And that's the way I see it. And to me, there's really only two things that are going on. There's really only two things that we should worry about. The first is survival, is to make sure that through our own liquidity and our own borrowing, plus the government stimulus plans, that we all have enough money to get through not only 2.5 or 3 months, but God forbid 4 or 5 or 6 months. Maybe the world isn't shut down for 6 months, but maybe our businesses initially don't come back at full bore, or maybe they come back even bigger. We don't know. But the idea, I think, if you've got 4 or 5 or 6 months of liquidity, which I think everyone on this call, or virtually everyone on this call, will have between their own resources and this stimulus package, we're going to be bulletproof as companies, or near bulletproof, so that we've taken care of the downside. So that's the first thing we should worry about. As soon as that's done, though, I want to switch to offense. I hate playing defense. You know, I mean, there used to be a saying. They used to say, you know, you got to give what, in football, they used to say, you got to give, you take what the defense gives you. And I used to say, that's BS. Let's take what we want. And so the idea to me is, I think that if you've covered the downside, here are some things that I think I'd be looking to when we start to play offense again. So that once everyone has what we call cash confidence, they have confidence that they're not going to run out of cash, and their business is going to be there, and their bills are going to be paid for, let's call it, at least 6 months. And have that cash confidence, we can then go to offense. And I think one thing that I've taken from this, I think there's a few lessons from this. One is, I don't think it applies to dentists specifically, but I think that but to the rest of the world, I think we're going to need a lot less office space, because I think a lot of people are working pretty effectively from home. So I think if you're in the office space business, I think you may have less tenants in the near future. But I think the other lesson that I've learned is that relationships are the most important thing. You know, that the very fact that the relationships with your patients, the relationships with your staff, the relationships with the people of your neighbors and the people in your community and your friends and the other people that interact in your life. And the idea to me is, it just becomes clearer and clearer to me through this time that none of you are in the dental business. I'm not in the financial services business or the wealth management business. We're in the people business. We're in the business of creating high trust relationships quickly and permanently. And the idea to me, that's the business. That's the difference between the very strong practices and the very weak practices. It has nothing to do with how good your margins are. It has nothing to do with, the type of dentistry you do. It has everything to do with how your patients trust you, how your staff trust you, and how you emerge as a leader in your community. You know, one of the things that, talk about lessons that I've learned from the past. I love what Fred Joel came out with last week, where he talked about making sure that you gave your personal cell phone number to all of your patients, or certainly all of your best patients. And I remember that one of the most recent crisis we had in the Northeast was Hurricane Sandy, where people had no power, they had no anything for, probably 3 weeks. And I remember there was this client of mine, I'm going to tell you his name. He didn't give me permission, but I'm going to tell you. His name is Brent Yeomans, who since Hurricane Sandy was a client of mine, and a guy that had a nice construction business. But the idea to me is, he called me on a Sunday morning a couple of weeks into the crisis, and he said to me, hey, Mark, what are you doing today? And I said, well, I'm going to go out and get 3 Sunday newspapers, and I'm going to sit in line for the next 6 hours and try to get a tank of gas so I can go to work on Monday. And he said, no, you're not. And he showed up about 20 minutes later with about 200 gallons of gas for me and everybody that was at my house. And I've probably told that story 100 times, but I will tell you that I cannot tell you how many millions of dollars of business I've referred to Brent's construction company in that 5 or 6 year period of time. How many people have known that story, and I've seen that guy's business grow by probably tenfold, over 25 gallons of gas per person. You know, that doing that kind of stuff, or being a great leader, or being a leader of your team, it may not affect your paycheck or your bank book this week, but how you emerge from this as not a dentist in your community, but a business leader, a community leader, somebody to be looked up to and thought of in your community, is how the best get better, and how the best change the world. And the idea to me is that in this time when everybody's moaning and complaining and crying, and the world is coming to an end. I mean, I said, if you turn on Fox, the thing's going to be over in 2 weeks. If you turn on CNN, we'll all be dead in 2 weeks. And depending on the channel you're watching it, there's people like on suicide watch. And at the end of the day, what we need to be is the great leaders, because we will all get through this. I also think that one of the things that, and by the way, one thing I did leave out, you'll also all, back to the stimulus package, be likely to push back your loans you'll also be able to push back your loans by at least 90 days, sometimes 180 days. Sometimes there are some institutions that may even waive the interest. Most are just deferring the interest and adding it to the back end. But I think the idea to me is, you have the stimulus package, you'll probably have the money to pay a lot of those loans, but you'll have to make an individual decision based on your circumstance. But I do think that the other opportunity is, there's not a lot of, there's a lot of tough things going on in the world, but one of the things is, if you're bankable, this also could be a unique opportunity to refinance not only all of your personal debt, but all of your business debt as well. Depending upon the interest rates you have on the current loans, depending on whether there's surrender penalties or prepayment penalties or not in your loans, and also depend upon if you're bankable as a person, meaning your credit score is reasonably good, et cetera, that I think that these banks will open up. And this will be an opportunity to take debt and reduce our debt service in the long term, because I'm seeing some rates on business loans that are in the mid twos. I'm seeing mortgages in the mid twos, even the low threes. And I think that you'll wake up in 6 months or a year if you're eligible for this refi or this debt restructure, and you'll go, wow, I've really done great things for my family and for my business and for myself, and allowed myself to not only make more money, but invest more money in our business. I also think that one of the things, Bernie and I wrote that book a couple of years ago, and Kim referred to it when we started, on mergers and acquisitions, in the dental space. And the idea to me is that I don't want to see, I don't want anybody to be seen as predatory. And I don't want to see anybody be seen as, I don't want you to be known as, Mr. Potter from It's a Wonderful Life trying to put the building and loan out of business, or stealing your neighbor's homes. But if you believe some dental experts, and I think there's a little bit of hype in that too, there's some dental experts out there saying that as much as 1/3 of the dental practices will not reopen when this thing opens up. And again, those won't be the people on this phone. Those won't be the people that are in fortune management, but those will be some of the weak players in our field, people that probably shouldn't have been in business anyway. But when the economy is doing well, by the way, that number might not be 1/3, it might be 10% or 15%, but I think it's probably likely that the bottom third will likely be either not open or be in severe financial distress when we come back. And so many of these practices that had no interest in playing the merger acquisition game, no interest in selling, no interest in shutting down a month ago, have a whole different mindset than they did. Anecdotally, I had a woman who was 58 that we met with in December, and we put together a doctor, and she put together a 10-year plan for her to then retire in 10 years. And part of that plan included working for the next 10 years. She called me on Monday and said, you know what, I'm 59 now, it's 4 months later. And she said, or 3 months later, she said, you know what, I'm 59, I have diabetes, I've got enough money, I want to get out. And literally I said to her, well, with a shut down business, I'm not sure if I can get it financed right away, but if you're willing to do an earnout, I think I could get that done pretty quickly at a fair price, a good price to you and a good price to the seller. She said, great, I think we got that deal. I think we're going to get that deal, a letter of intent out later this week or early next week. And so I think that a lot of these weaker players will now be very open to opportunities. And I think that one of the things that you may do, as long as we don't seem predatory, is do we change our merger acquisition letters as not somebody who's predatory, but somebody who's a leader in our community, willing to lift up and help those people in trouble in their businesses. And I think it's delicate. It's dancing on the head of a pin. I would ask you to refer you back to Bernie. I'd refer you back to Kim and Jennifer and your coaches to talk about that further. And I'd be happy to talk to you about it as well. But again, there's going to be some great opportunities. And I think for the people that are really in trouble, to give them a lifting, a helping hand up or a lifting arm up, I think is something that would be great, not predatory. And then I think the other thing that I would also say is that you also have somewhere between 14 and 90 days, 14 days optimistically, I think we open up within about 2 weeks. Maybe we do that in some parts of the country. It might be as much as 60 or 90 days in some other hard hit parts of the country. Again, we don't have any idea. But I think once you've covered the downside, you've gotten your liquidity needs covered, not only to handle the downturn, but also enough liquidity to explode out of the downturn and have the liquidity to be able to go out into the marketplace and really invest and grow our business. The idea to me is that we can use this time to do a couple of things. One is to do some of the personal projects and things that you hadn't done before, get some rest, do all the things you probably not done because you're all running around like chickens with your head cut off like I am. But I think the other issue is to think about what are the things we need to do. How do we keep our teams in place? How do we schedule when we come out of this for extra hours or extra days that we may need to schedule? When we have that liquidity, believe me, when I look at my balance sheet, again, I think there's only two things on that balance sheet on the liability side. There's either expenses and there's investments. If you're an expense, you're always on the chopping block in my company. If you're an investment, we have an unlimited appetite for investments as long as I get at least a 4 or 5 or 1 return on my money. So the idea is when we have that enhanced liquidity, we're going to be able to make it turtling. When everybody is still turtling and playing from scarcity in the fetal position, we're going to have the cash confidence to be able to go and make those investments when everybody else is still in turtle mode. And then I think, to me I think I would just say to you, and I'll kind of end my remarks, is I say to my fellow entrepreneurs that it's been the people on this phone, it's been small business, it's been the entrepreneurs of this country that have led every American and every person around the world out of their crisis. It's not been government who's led us. It's not been big corporations mostly. It's not been people that have a job. It's been entrepreneurs. It's been the folks like us who have been leaders and have led people out of these crises to a much higher purpose. And I would just say to all of you, because I know how that all of you do not play from scarcity, you play from abundance. Sometimes it's hard to play from abundance in times like this. But I think even for the most abundant thinkers on this call, and there are many of them, I believe, and I know you believe, that we all have better futures for ourselves than we can even think. And I just thank you for letting me have my comments. Kim, I'd be willing to open that up to
Sure.
anybody who wants to talk about something, and make the questions. If you have a question, just make it easy, because I'm tired.
So Mark, this is Angelina. It looks like we do have a question on our chat box, and if anybody else has a question, please use the chat box, and we'll make sure Mark gets to your questions. The first question is from Ragan, and she wants to know, how does the payroll protection work with independent contractors, and what is your advice for them?
I think that the answer, Ragan, that's one place where they keep saying they're going to take care of these folks through the Paycheck Protection Plan. It's the fine print has not come out. Everything we've seen has been in, sort of summary, because I don't think there's very few people who've read all 1,400 pages. But I think that it'll be clear that they have made it a point that independent contractors will be taken care of. You will not have, obviously, payrolls, but they're going to come up with some number, and I think it's going to be, I likely think it'll be based on your income, over the last couple of years, or your income as of probably your tax return, probably from the tax return that you most recently filed, which for most people will be 2017 or 2018. And that'll be an individual thing, but that's what they've indicated, that they will base the independent contractor on your most recent tax return. Angelina?
Thank you so much. Do we have any other questions? I don't see any. Oh, here we go. They're coming through. So Reagan's response is, so our clients with 1099 associates, should the associate file for unemployment?
Again, these are, I would say, these are, I don't mean to be vague, but these are probably better questions for your accountant. I believe that payroll, that in the patient, that when the forms come out or we apply for that, we will be using 1099 income as part of our payroll protection. At least it's been indicated that they would be included. Again, the final regulations aren't out. I mean, I still think that you may even have a little bit of trouble in the House today, because there are still some, this is my understanding at least, you can have a voice vote, a unanimous consent in the House. But if even one congressperson objects, then you have to have a quorum there to actually vote. And because people are still fighting for things like, money for illegal immigrants, and for the arts and sciences, and for abortion rights, and for board of directors having diversity, and things that, whether you think they're great ideas or not great ideas, it's holding up Americans' ability to get paid, and to be well healthy, and be sick, and even holding, it may cause a few people to die by holding this up. And not to be melodramatic, but I don't think we really know the details. So when you get to those real granular details of exactly how it's going to be filed, how it's going to happen, I don't think we know it yet, although I can tell you that Jennifer Chevalier told me this morning that Fortune will have a special website and a special place for Fortune clients to be able to fast track your claims. Jen, I don't have any details on that, but maybe if you'd unmute, I'd love you to comment on that as well.
Oh, yes. So she's putting it in the chat box. So Jen says we've expedited the process through our lenders. What basically we're doing is you'll be able to go to a website, ddsmoney.com, and she's got it in the chat box. And you're going to pre-register, and basically we're working with our lenders to help you guys get your SBA loan and to speed up the application process.
Hey, Kim, this is Jen.
Oh, yeah. Oh, there you are.
Can you guys
Cool.
hear me?
Yes, we
can. Yeah, so guys, the application process is going to be pretty standardized with SBA lenders throughout the country. What we have done is we have leveraged our network and talked to some specific lenders that said, hey, we've got some of our great clients that need this ASAP. And so what we've done is we've created a specific portal for our clients that will be able to get access to the calculator probably by the end of today. And the application, they're saying, would be up as soon as Monday. And so what I would urge you is to go to our landing page, ddsmoney.com, and pre-register so that you are on the list that when the application goes live, you can get a head start on that process. The documents and all of that has not been released yet as far as what you need to get prepared for. We did give you some guidelines as of yesterday on some expectations, but we will be updating it as soon as those document requirements are available. It should be a pretty simple app from what I am understanding. And this is different from the disaster loan. So if you have already registered with the disaster loan, it does not preclude you from registering for this as well.
Okay, that answers a few questions that just came up at the bottom of our screen for you, Jennifer.
And Angelina, I also think, and Jennifer, I also think that, the way these bills work, if anyone knows how Washington works, senators and congressmen are let's call it macro thinkers. In fact, they can't be experts on all issues. And so basically what happens is when these bills get passed, there's very broad kind of agreement on what's going to happen. But then ultimately, even once the bill is passed, what happens is it's all the legislative aides and the lawyers who then go and make all the technical fixes. And exactly how, they basically give a broad sweeping, this is what we want to do, and this is the broad strokes, is which we have now. What's going on now, probably over the weekend and maybe as early as the beginning of next week, is then how do you get money into people's hands? There's some talk about these loans, even some of them potentially, there's been talk about even bypassing the banks and going direct deposit right into your bank account, where you give somebody a direct deposit number, and they will wire that money right into your account, because the banks may not be able to handle certain loans. I mean, there's a lot of discussion like this going on. The only thing I encourage you is that when you fill out these loans, you want to tell the truth, because if you remember during 9/11 or during Hurricane Sandy, for people that exaggerated, lied, or didn't tell the truth, the government, once things settled down a year or two later, came back and made examples of those folks. So I think as long as we're telling the truth, I think all good things will happen. But if I say my payroll was $1 million a week, instead of the 100,000 a month, I think they're going to have a problem with that, as an example. But I think for all of us, we just have to do it well. And I think there's also some other firms. I think also by Monday or so, there will probably be a couple of other folks that are in our world that I don't want to mention it because they're still working on it now, who will be available and maybe for a small fee, be able to help expedite all of these policies and procedures for you if you want to try to take this off your plate and put it on their plate. I think we may be able to make an announcement to some of those people next week. I'm not, I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but it will not be me. But that may be helpful to folks, and I may do that myself because I'm not an expert at filling out SBA forms or filling out, unprecedented loans.
Okay.
So there are a couple of questions. Eric Adler, one other person is asking, can you apply for the personal protection program and the SBA loan at the same time? I'm sorry, the payroll protection, the PPP.
Yeah.
You can do both?
Yes, you can.
Okay. Okay.
Yes. I think you want to do both.
Okay, perfect. And then I think Kyle had a question. You may have answered it, but I want to make sure. Which SBA loan is going to be more beneficial? SBA disaster loan or SBA loan that follows the CARES bill?
The Paycheck Protection Plan, again, if you use it for payroll, for rent, or for mortgages or certain utilities, it's going to be fully forgiven. If you don't use it for that, you're going to have to pay it back. So that to me, for anybody that's in that category, that to me, seems like that's not a loan, that's a grant. If you use it for the right purposes. The SBA loan, I think, is a little trickier, and I think the details are coming out on that. And that may some of that may be forgiven, but I think the worst case scenario is it's a low cost, long-term line of credit. And I think as long as it's a line of credit, if you don't need it, you can always give it back. If you do need it, you want to have it, both to play, as we talked about, to make sure we get through this, but then also to be in a position that we have cash confidence to be able to explode out of this when everybody else is still in the fetal position.
Okay. Perfect. Let me make sure.
So Jennifer, if you're reading in the text box, Jennifer is saying the best rule of thumb at this point is to take 1 month of rent, of overhead, your rent, mortgage, payroll, et cetera, and multiply that by 2.5 for the 2.5 months. What if you own your own building and you pay yourself rent? Would that be the same rent amount, I'm assuming?
Yeah, I think if you have a track record of paying, the IRS will ask for some documentation. And I think what they're going to try to do is just get money into people's hands. And then, if you've lied or told the truth, they're going to, you'll have your day will come, your day of recompense will come. Sort of like it did in 9/11, people that put all those phony claims in Hurricane Sandy in 9/11, they had some problems, some criminal and some horrible interest and penalties. So, I think none of us are going to do that. All of us are going to be just doing the right things. And, so I think you're right. I think Jennifer put it in that thing. It's going to be 2.5 times, I think, your average payroll as of February 15th of 2020. The thing I do worry about, though, on this is that, many of you have laid off your employees. The devil that's in the details that I don't want to talk about because I'd just be guessing is the decision to bring everybody back, to cut salaries, to do other things. I think when the final regs are in, then it'll be very clear on what the rules are and then what we can do. So, sometimes, everybody has like these very good questions they're asking, but you're also asking, somebody, it's almost like a prediction that we're making rather than giving you advice, because all we have is the information that's out so far. When the final regs come out, then we can be very clear and said, hey, in the fine print, you got to do this, this, and this, and then we'll make sure we does this, this, and this to stay compliant. But right now, I'd just be making a swag, a scientific wild ass guess.
Okay. Perfect. There's a question from Phil Bride, and his question is, can I defer loan proceeds until I'm back in the office and use unemployment for employees until then?
Oh, just read that again, Angelina, you cut out a little bit.
Sure. Can I defer loan proceeds until I am back in the office and use unemployment for the employees until then?
I believe the answer to me is we don't know, but I believe the answer I believe that the likelihood, if you use common sense, would be no, because the reason that this bill is put together is it was put together to keep companies together, to keep the employees on payroll and not on unemployment. So if you keep people on unemployment, I would say it's highly unlikely that they're going to look favorably on that, but I don't know. I've not seen the final regulation. I also see Bill Wagner. I see Bill's question right on the screen. Yeah, I believe, Bill, yes, of course, if you have more than one corporation, it'll apply to your total payroll from all of your offices, Bill, for the protection plan. And there will be some kind of aggregate when the rules come out of what you can get on the disaster relief loan. So yeah,
Mark, this is Jennifer again. Just a comment, guys, as far as the whole point of this plan is to take the 3.3 million people that applied for unemployment and put them back to work. So the idea is to get in the queue to get this grant so that we can get our people back in work. And for the dental perspective, maybe we're open by the end of the month in April, maybe in May for some of us. The idea is that we can get everybody back on payroll for the month of April and definitely for the month of May at really, really no cost to you to be able to start working strategically on your business so that when doors open, we are all cylinders firing. So this is, an unbelievable gift from the government. And, you know, the details are still a bit fluid, have not been finalized. And so as, you know, that comes out, we will definitely make sure you guys are the first to know. But I would definitely take advantage of this program.
You know, I just say to me, Jen, I think spot on. I think what this really does is buys you 2 to 3 months in terms of expenses or your major expenses. And so the idea, if you can come out of this hole, if you do have cash confidence coming out of this because of your own planning and because of these programs, it now gives you 2.5 months or somewhere between 2 weeks and 2.5 months to work on all of those projects that you never get to work on your team building, to work on the things you need to do so that, you know, as I've heard Bernie say many, many times before, he always tries to create a company this year that would put last year's company out of business. We now have a unique opportunity to put our companies together, to have a company that will put our company as of March 15th or March 1st. We would put that company out of business and have a brand new company that we're not playing on a level playing field. We're not running straight downhill, as I've said for 20 years. We're playing in a competition-free zone where the only place people will want to go to have their dentistry in your community is to your practice and nobody else's. What if we could spend the next couple of weeks or couple of months building that kind of company, and we're doing it with the government paying for us to do it? I think that's how I would look at it.
So Jen and Mark, if people have put their, if they have temporarily laid off their team members and they've applied for unemployment, once they get all this money, would they then hire them back?
Yes, and what I would recommend is either an HR for Health webinar at 10 o'clock today or at 9 a.m. on Monday morning. If you can make either one of those, Ali has made it available for everybody, whether you're an HR for Health client or not, for exactly how that process works.
By the way, also, I'm reading the law also says basically to the effect is, it's not like you have to bring all those same people back, but you have to bring people back for that role, meaning if you don't bring everybody back and your payroll is less than it had been, they'll likely reduce the amount of money that's the grant and turn that into a loan. So, you know, somebody may have, you know, retired, or somebody, you know, this may also be a unique opportunity, and I'll let the lawyers deal with this. But one of the things that may be possible is that there may be some people that shouldn't come back to your office, and maybe you don't bring them back and use this as an opportunity. Don't take that as advice from me, but talk to your attorney about it, because you know, it just says that you have to have the payroll the same. It doesn't say you have to have the exact same people in place. So you may have a couple of you might trade out a person or two.
And Mark, it also doesn't mean that even if the shelter is in place, that we all have to report back to work and not get paid. Our employees can work from home. There are projects, them going on certain education and webinars and learning. You know, you've got to start being creative. We've talked about virtual hygiene. We've talked about doing teledentistry. Talked about, you know, just having PR and, you know, reach out to all of our perio patients and call them, make sure they're okay, high risk patients, you know, creating different protocols. You know, there's a lot of things that they can be doing at home and still be getting paid for and considered employed.
The other thing that also comes up when I got a private text from somebody was, you know, the argument to me is that what's the other great news is that virtually everybody on this phone call did not have a disproportionate amount of their liquid money in the stock market. In fact, most of you who work with us have delevered your portfolio at least once or twice over the last 6 months. And so between your cash values, your life insurance, and the money you have invested, you do not have most of your money in the market. Our best advice would be that at the very least, you should not be selling stocks. And if you needed it for an expense that's coming up shortly, it shouldn't have been in the stock market in the first place, which I think applies to almost nobody on this call. And I think that this is long-term money. So I do think that the idea would be that at the very least, you'll hold on if we're allocated properly. And the market, whether it takes 2 or 3 months or 2 or 3 years, history tells us that it will bounce back. The other idea, though, people are trying to say, let's buy on the dips. And you've seen 3 amazing days in the market. The thing that you want to be cautionary about, though, too, is that what we really don't know is there's a concept that's called dead cat bounces. And dead cat bounces have there's a couple of things that I want to maybe explain to people that go on. One is called a dead cat bounce. And what a dead cat bounce is that when the market has a big drop, people think they're getting a bargain and they buy on the dips. And so temporarily the market goes up. But then some more bad news comes out a day or two later and it goes to new lows. That's what was happening for the first week or two. Whether this is sustainable or not is basically determinable on the facts on the ground. You know, is there likely to be a lot more bad news coming out, a lot more deaths, or you know, no end in sight to a virus, to a vaccine, or to a cure, or to treatments that will help lessen the benefits, or not enough hospital beds. You know, bad news like that, or bad news from Italy or China or Korea would make the market probably go to new lows. Or it could be the opposite. It could be some great news and could come back. And so I think if you're buying back in the market now, you're doing it with money that you're not going to need for at least 5 or 10 years or longer. And you're doing it knowing that you may not have caught the bottom. You know, we may not have found the true bottom yet. But again, if anybody told me they had a crystal ball, you know, you should buy the Brooklyn Bridge and play 3-card Monte with them too.
We didn't get to one doctor's question. She's in the process of selling the practice. Any advice for her? I think it's a her, Lisa.
I think that, and again, I believe that the banks are not going to be lending on a business that is shut down. I think it's highly improbable that a bank will lend on a shut down business. But I do think that as soon as we open up again and we get back to any semblance of normalcy, I think that you know, they'll still be doing deals. What I do think, though, remember we talked earlier on the call, Kim, about the haves and the have-nots, the people that are well-positioned and the people that are not well-positioned. I think that you've got to also think that one of the reasons why these weaker players will be more open to working with us and working with the folks on this call is because the people on this call will still have access to lending at very low rates. They'll still have access to, you know, a lot of things. Will be business as usual, likely. And for those people that are the weaker players, they're going to really put the clamps on them and be very restrictive in what kind of loans they can get, at what interest rates, et cetera, et cetera. I think the banks will use this as an excuse to make sure they're not lending money to people that you know, are not strong players.
By the way, I did put the link to the Facebook page for HR for Health. We'll be doing a live webinar in about 15 minutes there. What other questions do we have?
The other thing too is, just like Fred Joyle did, I think virtually everybody on this call has my cell phone number. And so I'll also give that out to everybody on this call. It's area code, in fact, I think 2 nights ago, I think my last call ended at 2:15 in the morning and my first call was 5:30 in the morning. So other than the hours of 2:15 to 5:30 Eastern, I'm available. But my cell phone is area 201-394-3098. And as I say, you know, I'll find a way to get to you. If I can't pick up the phone, I will certainly get back to you promptly. And you know, nobody's alone in this. I think one of the other great things is we've got a community around us. We've got a community here at Fortune, and we've got some experts, not only in dentistry but experts in business that are surrounding around us. You know, some of the law firms we have, and some of the accountants, and some of the technology we have, and the expertise. And so one of the things I think is that, you know, being an entrepreneur is a pretty lonely business sometimes. You know, if you don't have partners, you're sort of like a one-woman or a one-man band. And, you know, the only person you can talk to is your priest or your rabbi or your psychiatrist. You know, and I think that the great thing about this is that we all have each other to lean on and to use our best practices. And one of the things that I think we're all committed to do is sharing all of our best practices, because we're not competitors. We're colleagues and partners and great neighbors. And you're going to have all the tools. We're going to create the tools and techniques together to make sure that, again, I wish no ill will on anybody, particularly, you know, I mean, I only wish good things to happen to everybody. But I think as a group, we're going to be able to turbocharge our businesses and look back at this as something that allowed us to create an awful lot of wealth for ourselves and our patients. I know that's a little bit, you know, disturbing sometimes to talk about during a crisis about these kind of things. But I think what we're really doing is we're going to help lift up those people, those patients, and those practices, and take advantage of what's available so that we can continue to do good work for our patients and for our teams.
I couldn't agree more. I was talking with a client yesterday, and we were reflecting on how Fortune practices, not only all these business systems that we're giving you, we've taught you a lot about your state management, your own emotional fitness and leadership and culture. And that is one of the things that's going to keep you all from not just surviving, but thriving through this. So thank you to our Fortune family. Mm-hmm.
Kim, the other thing that I see a couple of questions out again is what I keep coming back to is like people are saying, well, can I prepay rent and not bring back employees, or can I lay employees off and do this? I think at the end of the day, if you game the system, to try to game the system to your advantage by trying to play games and not bring your teams, it's called the Payroll Protection Act. And so if you're trying to play games with your team to try to save a few bucks here or there, my guess is not seeing the final bill, that's going to come back to bite you in the ass. I mean, if you try to be cute about it, it was in place to bring back people, keep your teams together, pay your rent, pay your mortgages, pay your utilities, and prepare our businesses for 2.0 or 10.0, depending on where your business is. So I think any of those questions that I see about where I see that it's almost like a gaming of the system, is the answer to me is I would not advise you to do that. I think when you get too cute, you might wind up taking a grant that's 100% forgivable and make it 100% pay backable. I don't even think that's a word. By the way, why don't you unmute Ragan Hartman? She had a great question, but I think she might even have a better answer. Ragan, I'd love you to respond to that.
Which question?
The one about energy, the energetic level. I'd love you to talk about that. That's a coach's question, not a financial question.
Well, as this thing unfolds and everything that most of us at Fortune have read or been exposed to or trained on, the rebound from an energetic level is much different from the rebound from a logical level and from a left brain level. And so when one of the primary conversations I've been having with my clients and my teams is really about what you're choosing to focus on, which I know Jennifer and Kim and Jonathan Miller and all of these guys have really been pushing out to all of our clients over the past few days. But, if we go back to some of the fundamentals of what we teach, it's really about what we focus on, we tend to create. What we believe in is what tends to come to pass. And so, when we're looking at these rebounding options, while we're trying to navigate the legalities and what the government is offering, and you were just speaking to it, Mark, like when we say that our values are a specific thing, are we honoring those values even in uncertain times? When we talk about our beliefs or our beliefs around our culture being a specific thing, are we honoring those values and beliefs in uncertain times, which is when those are tested most, right?
I'm not muted, but for the people who are muted, I say, here's a hell yeah to that. Here's a hell yeah. Yeah, that's who we are. I think we show up who we are, Ragan, when times are tough, when nobody's looking, when times get tough. What do? Were we leaders? Did we stand up? Were we people that were leaders in our community? Or we find a way to game the system for ourselves, or kick the little guy to the curb, or try to do something that we would not do if it was on the front page of the newspaper.
Exactly.
And so I don't think there's anybody on the phone that would do that. And by the way, I think if you do it and you come from that place of integrity, it will endure to your pocketbook, maybe not this week, but in the short and intermediate and long term, it will certainly allow you to create a lot more wealth for yourself and certainly allow you to sleep a lot better at night. Because there's no right way. I always say there's no right way to do the wrong thing. There's just no right way to do the wrong thing. And that's what I would impart. And that's how what we try to live with. So, I've even said to my employees, if we did do a layoff, which looks like we may not, based on this legislation, my goal would be, when we got to business to normal, would be to grow our business so that everybody was whole by the year. That nobody missed 1 cent from their paycheck is what I've told our folks. And, I intend to keep that. And we're going to do it out of abundance and out of growing our business, not out of scarcity. One of the things, Arash Razi, how you doing, Arash? I hope you're well. But I saw your question, and I don't know if you joined late or not, but one of the things also on part of the stimulus package is when you apply, they will give you an immediate $10,000 disbursement. And that $10,000 disbursement can go for a short-term, payroll if you don't have the cash to kind of keep things running until the money can get to you. My guess is that the money probably gets to you by mid-April is what my guess is. I mean, I really don't know. That's just a guess as well. But I know they know people are in trouble and they're going to try to do whatever they can to get that money to everybody quickly. I just think the other thing to me, like yourself, is that when you go to these crises, even myself, immediately you go to like a scarcity mode very quickly. And as quickly as you get out of that and go back to your abundant mindset is when the game slows down and everything in the world seems possible. And all of a sudden, instead of worrying about the crisis, all of a sudden on my mind, you go, what's great about that? And all of a sudden the world becomes all about possibilities again and how I can grow my business even faster than I would have grown it pre-virus. I remember myself, I had a pity party for myself for a day or two and like, oh my God. And I was on the phone 20 hours a day. And then I think about 3 or 4 days later, I said to my team, I go, I think the bottom is hit and now we're turning and going upward. And there was no empirical evidence in the news or in anything else that did it. But the world got a lot better and good things started happening for us the minute my mindset shifted, as opposed to having the pity party for myself for a couple of days and going to that natural scarcity mode. And so as I said, I think that's technology that we all know, we all believe in, we all use almost all the time, but it does test every one of us during these times. And I think everybody should have should make sure they have an accountability buddy with their coach or with their best friend on this call to make sure we never let everybody's mindset get to a place that's scarcity.
Awesome. Well said. Thank you so much, Mark. Dr. Birch, I want to acknowledge you figured out how to put your logo on the green screen. That's pretty cool. My computer needs an upgrade to be able to do that. Awesome. Well, if anybody else has any questions, please type it in. But I think
I have a comment.
We've answered everybody's questions. Yeah.
I have a comment. So right now I'm reading this book called The Power of Moments. It's by
Jim. Yep.
And Heath. Okay.
Yep.
So this is like so powerful for right now. They talk about transitions, they talk about milestones, and they talk about pits. So this coronavirus thing is a pit, and we need to learn how to fill it and learn how to fill it fast. And so kind of working with your teams and figuring out how can we serve people even better than we did before, right? This is a chance for us to elevate our game and to be better than we were before. And just to, I see that Fred's on here, but I want to plug his book also, Becoming Remarkable, that there's a million things in here that can help you elevate your game. So, if you guys are finding it, if you're all depressed and you're in your pity party, I'm going to tell you, start reading those books and you'll find some ways to get yourself out of that. When your mind, when your body moves, your mind grooves. So this is just action, right?
One thing I saw
Love
last.
it. Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Jim, come to the last question that came up, and I think we're almost, only have 4 or 5 minutes left. But I would also say that, people have heard, and there's been some rumors that they've heard from law firms or other that you can't get PPP and the SBA loan. You get one, not both. That's not my understanding. And by the way, and somebody mentioned a firm, DLA Piper. In fact, the U.S. managing partner is a client and good friend of ours. But I believe DLA Piper, being one of the largest or second largest law firm in the world, they're dealing with multinational conglomerates. My guess is they're not dealing primarily with companies and businesses with less than 500 employees that are covered by this. So the answer is, I don't think anyone knows for sure, but I've not seen anything that applies to us so far that would prohibit us getting both. And I say that to Gene and say that to Amy on your questions, but we'll find out. We'll find out here in the next couple of days because nothing is in cement yet.
We are recording this webinar and we will put it up on our resources page, I believe. And so yes, to Dr. Van Horn. We will have this webinar able to watch again. And thank you all for the positive comments. Dr. Augustine, it's great to see you on here, and all the rest of the wonderful doctors that we know from around the country. It's been awesome. Thank you so much, everyone. Have an amazing day and a beautiful weekend with your family.
Thanks, Kim. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Stay safe. Goodbye.
You too. Thank
Bye.
you.